Bohemian Rhapsody hits theaters soon, but is it a killer Queen biopic? We'll let you know here on Screen Junkies News. I'm Dan Murrell.
And I'm Roth Cornet, and that was well played, sir.
Thank you. So many you could have gone with. Don't Stop Us Now.
Yeah.
That's the only other one I can think of, but there are a lot.
I had a really, really, really stretched one about does the mercury heat us up? So we're glad that the puns are to Dan and not to me. But let's talk about the movie.
Yes.
Now, when we were going into this movie, we talked about it briefly ahead of time, and one of your concerns was that it would be wig and teeth.
A wig and teeth movie.
A wig and teeth movie. Now, warning, there are wigs
and there are teeth. Yes. It is a wig and teeth movie.
However, centered in just a stellar, I think almost perfectly, this is a movie that rests on one man, and it is Rami Malek, who plays Freddie Mercury, and his performance sells the entire movie, which is pretty interesting for a Queen biopic.
Yeah.
Not that Queen isn't great. Queen's great, but Freddie Mercury is the one that most of us really connect with.
He was the front man for the band. And I think that that's why this was a long in gestation film, and one that was in pre-production for a very long time. Sacha Baron Cohen was attached at one point, and one of the early words in this film was that some of the disagreements were that members of the band sort of wanted a movie that was more half about Freddie Mercury and half about the band.
Right, and we, the audience, said, we just want a movie about Freddie Mercury, thank you very much.
Yeah, not against those bands, but Freddie Mercury being the front man for that band, he was also the heart and soul in the sense that he was the lead singer. He was the outrageousness, and they had very unconventional music, and he sold that music.
He sold the music. He's one of the greatest showmen, interestingly enough, that has ever been on stage. He had one of the more spectacular voices in rock and roll history. I mean, there's a number of reasons that Freddie Mercury is a legend. He earned it. He gave what many people think is arguably one of the best concert performances of all time at Live Aid. That is featured in this film as well. So let's talk about it. Wigs, teeth, and acting. That's my pull quote.
Wigs, teeth, and acting. The first 30 minutes of the film felt very wig and teeth to me.
It really was. And I got to say, Dan, Billy Business and I talked about it, and we were sort of bummed you put that in our head.
I'm sorry. Well, I'll tell you, I think the reason why is that this is, I think, a pretty conventional biopic with a really great performance at the center of it with Rami Malek. He crushes this role, and because he is so central to the story, the movie shines all the more because he is great in it. But the first 30 minutes of the movie is what the first 30 minutes of every band movie has to be, which is, here's the members of the band. They're playing in a dive bar. They lose their lead singer. Here's Freddie Mercury, has a different name.
Magic.
He's a nobody. They meet each other. Oh my God, this guy can sing. Oh, here's us finding our sound. It's very standard stuff.
And here's us going up against the record label, and here's everybody telling us that we're going to fail, and here's everybody not understanding our big swing that became one of the biggest hits of all time.
Right.
All of these things, it checks off every box. And in that sense, I do think it's a rather generic music biopic. That said, as someone that generally doesn't buy into those, I love Queen enough. And I love this performance enough that I had a great time watching this movie. Rami Malek sells the soul of Freddie Mercury. And it leaps off the screen at you. And I have to say as well, the thing that I was wildly impressed with was that they were able to use Freddie's real voice and sort of seamlessly integrate it with, I don't know if there was a sound alike or what they were using, because there were moments that he was singing a cappella, and it sounded gorgeous and enough like Freddie. I don't know how they actually did that, but it's a technical feat.
He did some singing. I'm sure that there are recordings of Freddie Mercury that they may have incorporated as well. I agree. There weren't many lips. There were a couple of lip syncing moments where it felt like he was singing to a track, but not many. And I think that the reason why this is better than your average biopic is because this was not an average band. And when Queen finds its sound and when Freddie Mercury finds his persona, I think that there's a reason that's when the movie kind of takes off, because then you break out of the convention a little bit and you're allowed to see, like, how were they allowed to specifically create that sound, those rhythms, that music. that's what kind of set this apart for me. Was inside of this very standard structure, you had very unconventional music and a very unconventional lead character. Yeah. But a flawed one. And the movie's not afraid to shy away from Freddie's flaws. It doesn't feel like, in a way, it feels like the other members of the band are a little bit, the edges are sanded off a little bit.
I gotta say, this movie, and let's be very, very honest here, the filmmakers, the studio, are incredibly aware that Brian May and the surviving members of Queen need to sign off on this thing.
Yes, they needed the music.
They needed the music, and so in order to get the music, there is a moment in the movie, and I think I said this about another movie recently, where it feels as if the actor playing Brian May turns to camera and says, or actually Rami Malek kind of does it, and says, "And so you see, Freddie needed Queen as much as they needed him." And you're like, no, not really, but okay. I mean, and I would argue that that's actually true, that what he did in his solo career certainly didn't match what they did as a united band. That said, Freddie Mercury was the one that created these legendary songs. I mean, Brian May as well. Everybody deserves some credit, but he is the character we're interested in. And one of the reasons that we're interested in him is because he's the outlier.
Yeah.
He doesn't fit in the band. He doesn't fit anywhere. He feels so alone and so isolated in his life. He has one friend, Mary, who that's sort of a through line throughout the movie. But the one place in the world that he can self-express and be honest, because he's dishonest in a lot of his life. He was lying about his name. He was lying about his background. He was lying for a period of time about his sexuality. In the end, he lied about his disease until the day before he died.
Yeah.
The one place that he could express himself was on stage. And the thing that this movie does so beautifully is express that idea that this man was only free when he was performing.
Yeah, and if this had just followed the music and sort of had Freddie live his life in the background of it, I don't think I would be as enthused about this film. I think because it had the license to, there are some very good moments, particularly as you said, with Mary and with his sexuality, which even he himself was obviously questioning for a while or not aware of. And there's a very honest scene between the two of them that I think works really well. The fact that his loneliness, his isolation is played very powerfully. And I really can't say enough about Rami Malek.
Oh.
He's why this movie works as well as it does. Maybe there's other actors that could have performed as well, but he is so good in this movie. He should be an awards consideration.
He should, but he won't be. Because,
you don't think he will?
You know, I question that because, look, I agree with you. This movie falls apart without that performance. It's just, you know, I mean,
it's behind the music.
It's behind the music. You still have the music of Queen, and that's cool.
That's great. But go to big loud theater. It sounds amazing.
It sounds amazing. But this movie is about this performance, and what's so extraordinary is that he completely embodies Freddie Mercury, but he's not doing sort of an impersonation.
It's not a cheap imitation.
It's not a cheap imitation. He is vulnerable. He is raw. He's incredibly human. He understands. There's one moment where I thought, wow, he really understands his own power in this moment, where he says to someone, "You're out," meaning like you're out of my life. But he understands that, look, if we kick someone out of our lives, that's sad maybe, but it doesn't destroy their lives.
Right.
That is the amount of power he had in that moment, but that's also the amount of distance he had between him and a real connection. This movie is nothing without that. However, because I think it's a big biopic that I think largely will be thought of as like an okay movie in total, I think he might just be overlooked for that reason. Possible.
I think this movie is going to be massive in the UK. I think this is
so.
going to be maybe the highest grossing film of the year in the UK, unless they don't go with it. Unless the imitation, unless we love this performance, and then when it gets to the UK, they think that's not Freddie Mercury, that's some guy pretending
so maybe
to be
he
Freddie
gets
Mercury.
a BAFTA.
Maybe BAFTA consideration, perhaps. But if you're a fan of Queen's music, I think you're going to love this movie. Yeah. And I really do think that even if you're not, that you'll enjoy it, because I feel like the kind of person that is not familiar with Queen's music maybe also isn't the kind of person that has seen 5 or 10 or 15 of these music biopics. I think it kind of goes hand in hand. Your interest in music, your interest in this film.
Well, I hope you get introduced to Queen. You have so much good stuff ahead of you.
So much good stuff ahead of you. There is a joke that I liked in this film. I was talking to Billy Business. We split on this. We both liked the movie, but we split on this. Mike Myers plays a record executive in this film, and there's a joke in the movie
Not my favorite.
Not your favorite. So you didn't like it. I thought it was a great meta moment. I don't want to spoil it for it. I was a fan of it, but I think a lot of people were not a fan of it. I thought it was really fun and clever, but that's just me. I know I get why people would not be a fan of it.
It was just, well, you'll see what it is and you'll decide for yourself if you like the joke. I mean, if you even get the joke, that's another question.
A lot of people probably aren't going to get the joke.
It's like 4 steps away to get it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like, none of us need to be told what a hit Bohemian Rhapsody was and how dumb you would have to be to think that it wasn't going to be, you know?
Yeah.
Because it was a double hit. It was a hit when it came out, and then it went to #1 again in 91.
Yeah.
And that's why probably multiple generations are familiar with it.
Maybe so. But that was a joke that I like. Not my biggest, but a big qualm that I had with the movie, maybe my biggest, was we mentioned that Live Aid, that performance that plays a big part in this film. And this movie did not have the budget to pull that off. And in many ways, it's a very emotional climax for a lot of the movie is in that sequence. And I did not feel that the effects work was up to par. There are shots that, to me, were obviously in front of green screen.
I didn't notice.
The bad effects took me out of it. Didn't completely take me out because a lot of it is about the power not only of the music, but in Rami Malek's knowing where the character is in that moment. That's where that power to that scene, and it didn't completely ruin it for me, but there are shots that I just felt were not done properly, that if you can't pull that off on the budget, then I feel like they should have figured out a different way to do it, or to shoot it, or to do angles, because it's one of the rare times that I'm not able to just completely, even depending on the movie, unplug my brain on bad effects and just be like, it is what it is. It actively took me out of it a few times.
Interesting.
So I do feel that was a bad artistic decision and bad budget decision to not allocate more to that part of the film. And it is, like we said, a very sort of structurally very generic band story.
Yeah.
It's relying much more on Rami Malek's performance, the way that the movie writes the character of Freddie Mercury, which is very strong, and then the music, which you can't overlook how great the music is.
I mean, that's the thing is, I remember when the trailer came out, and it's sort of like, yeah, if you're going to play Queen, it's going to carry me through this trailer.
Yeah.
And it's going to make me excited because it's Queen. But the movie functions largely the same way, with driven by this performance, and I think a really, really interesting love story in the sense that, there's this song, Love of My Life, and he keeps saying that it's about this woman, Mary, who he was briefly engaged to. But at the end of the day, it was just not in a romantic way.
Right.
This was the one person he trusted. He was the godfather to her child. He left his fortune to her. She was the love of his life. It just wasn't in a way that allowed him to not feel so achingly lonely.
Yeah.
In the end. Also, a fact I didn't know about Freddie Mercury is that he is very into cats. And that plays a role in this movie.
It does.
And I won't lie, Dan, it elevated the enjoyment for me.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that aspect of his. I had no idea how into cats he was, and they don't shy away from it at all.
Yeah, no, they don't. I liked that aspect. There was another aspect of his later life that I felt was very shoehorned in, and I don't know if it was the best reason to include it in the movie, or if they were going to do that, to include it more in a more coherent way, rather than just sort of it's a reference once and then it's brought back in at the end, and that doesn't quite work. That's something that didn't quite work for me. But
well, I think if I know what you're talking about, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say, there's a very crucial relationship in his life that is covered in about 3 minutes of screen time.
It needed a little more love.
That the timeline itself is quite confusing and makes almost no sense. That said, overall, I recommend the movie.
I do too, yeah. I recommend it. I think that there are definitely some things that could have been better, but there are a lot more things that are done really, really well. And I think that people will enjoy this film. And I think if you're a fan, like I said, of Queen, especially, that you'll like this movie.
Well, I'm going to amend my pull quote and say that it is wigs, teeth, spectacular acting, and great, iconic, timeless music. So if you want those things, this is the movie for you. I would recommend it. I think it's a really good time, but go in knowing that this isn't going to be, I think, a film that is in and of itself, like an Amadeus, a masterpiece.
No.
But you will enjoy listening to Queen and watching Rami Malek embody Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, I agree. It was a little closer to me to Walk the Line, which was the Johnny Cash film wherein I admired the acting, thought the performances were great. The movie, maybe a little standard, but the performances are what stood out about it, and that's what I felt about this film as well. So there you go.
So you think you can... All right, I won't do that, but I'll just sign off.
All right. Thanks for watching. Join us next time.